In today's video, we have the latest trade talk from around the league. Today, we're looking at teams like the Vancouver Canucks, San Jose Sharks, and Philadelphia Flyers. Several more NHL injury updates, more news from the NHL waiver wire, and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, let's talk about the NHL waiver wire. Now, we did have a few players on waivers yesterday. We had Ben Harpur and Christopher Gibson. Harpur with the Rangers, Gibson with the Kraken, both signing new contracts, but they did require waivers to be assigned to the roster. So both players did in fact clear, so they can join their respective teams. No claims were made, and we do have a couple of new players on waivers here today. The Minnesota Wild had defenseman Dakota Mermis on waivers. You might be asking yourself why that is, because obviously he's not somebody who's been playing actively with the Wild, but sometimes what happens early in the season, players get hurt during training camp, and they end up on what's called season opening injury reserve, so they can't be assigned to the minors and go through the waiver process when, like you see, like, you know, when we had days like 40, 50, 60 players going through waivers near the end of camp. He would have been likely one of those players, but he was injured, so it couldn't happen. So now it's taking place. So I would suspect he most likely does clear and get sent down to Iowa. He has spent some time down there before in the past. And the Arizona Coyotes have Lucas Klock, who's a Czech Republic player who was being terminated. This is an undrafted player who signed a one-year deal, and they've mutually agreed to terminate the contract. So sounds to me like he came over to the NHL with aspirations to make the NHL club, got sent down to the minors after not making the team out of camp, and I guess he most likely probably wants to find opportunities outside of the league, possibly heading back to Europe. We'll have to wait and see what happens here. But this was like one of those one-year low-risk signings. The free agent from Europe comes over, didn't work out, terminated the contract, and likely heading back. Now, of course, we saw a trade again earlier today between Vancouver Canucks and the Carolina Hurricanes, where Ethan Bear was finally dealt, which was good for him. He's been waiting to play, waiting to get onto a new team, and his agent did make remarks to Vancouver media today suggesting that Vancouver was very much high on his list and a place he was really looking forward to, hoping that he was going to end up there. So it's good that he's obviously happy. He's going to get an opportunity. And a couple of other caveats that I didn't know at the time when we recorded the video on the trade. Apparently, he's actually quite good friends with Luke Schenn, who's also playing for the Canucks. They do work out a lot together in the summertime and train together, so that part is great. And the other player involved here is Lane Peterson, who went along with Bear to the Canucks. Mostly been playing in the minor leagues, but does have 44 games of NHL experience. Apparently, he's been in a long-term relationship with Luke Schenn's sister, so this found it interesting with the Luke Schenn connection to both of these players new to the Vancouver Canucks organization. But if you want full details, full reaction, full analysis on that trade, there is a video already posted earlier today, and I will put a link to it in the YouTube cards if you haven't already had time to check that out. Some injury updates from around the NHL and some demotions from players who were recently activated. The Vancouver Canucks have demoted Will Lockwood down to the minor leagues, and the Edmonton Oilers have sent down Carter Savoy as well. Of course, in Savoy's case, he hasn't played yet. He was injured and is now doesn't need waivers yet, like we talked about Dakota Mermis in Minnesota, same sort of scenario. But of course, he can head straight down to the American Hockey League. David Krejci of the Bruins was injured last night. Of course, they got Brad Marchand back, who really, this is quite an amazing feat, considering he's playing nearly a month ahead of schedule from the double hip surgery that he had. Did look like he didn't miss a beat, had a goal and assist, had a real solid game last night, but unfortunately they did lose Krejci. So he's, I don't really see, I haven't seen the Bruins announce like a long-term, like a really solid explanation to what exactly he's dealing with, how long he's going to be out, but he's not going to play in tonight's game. They do have a back-to-back, so they're back in action tonight, and of course Marchand's not supposed to be playing in back-to-back, so as much as they had a great game last night, they will be without two important pieces of their top six, so we'll see how they fare this evening, and hopefully for their sake, Krejci doesn't end up out too long, but we'll have to wait and see further updates on that. Apparently also after last night's game between Ottawa and Minnesota, it was revealed that defenseman Artem Zub did get hurt last night, and he's going on injured reserve. He's going to be out for at least a week. It could be upwards of a week and a half to two, and they have called up defenseman Dylan Hetherington because they needed a D to go with them on their trip. They're going to the state of Florida for games against the Panthers and the Lightning coming up here over the next couple of days. A few other names to watch as well. Valerie Nichushkin in Colorado and Miro Heiskanen in Dallas also going to be missing a little bit of time and are considered day-to-day right now as well. Now, on to some news and notes from around the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, this comes from Anthony DeMarco. One, he had an article out yesterday and some more information out here today. But essentially, based on what he's been hearing, there is some pretty serious, legit concerns that Flyers players Ryan Ellis and Sean Couturier's careers could be in jeopardy, and there is a good possibility, maybe not necessarily for both, but for one, maybe both, that their careers could possibly be over. Now, it's a little premature, a little early to say that with any kind of certainty. Probably a little bit more certainty on Ellis, considering how long he has been out. I mean, he only played a handful of games last year, got hurt, never came back, and then he's going to expected to be out all of this year. I mean, once you've been out for a couple of years, you don't usually make it back. It gets harder and harder and harder. And really with Ellis as well, there hasn't really been much reported in the way of progress. And in some of these cases, just like we're hearing in some other cases here, like Carey Price, they're obviously have to get to a point where they can even live day to day and be pain free, and their personal quality of life has to be to the point that they can even think about playing hockey again. And in this case for Ellis, it sounds like it's really not near that. In the case of Sean Couturier, of course, we had heard originally there was conflicting reports when he was first revealed about the back injury that was going to keep him out to start the season. And some said, 4 to 6 weeks. Some were saying that they were told that it could be season ending, and it might be, career altering. And obviously we know that he does have a bit of a history here with this type of injury, so it's not good news at all. I mean, the amount of money and term this team has tied up on both of these players, if they were both of them were never able to come back and play, that would be a devastating blow and really have a major impact on their salary cap situation. I realize they can place these players on LTIR and spend, the equivalent of their contracts over above the cap, but it's not really an ideal way for teams to operate, and it certainly complicates things tremendously. They both would rather have both these guys on the ice. They were key parts here. Now, I think in Couturier's case, there's a better chance that he does make it back, but when you start having this recurring setbacks and everything like he's been dealing with, it does certainly cause some concern for sure. But like I said, it's early, but that theory is out there that, the Flyers are wondering if indeed that could be the case. Now, of course, the Flyers have had a surprising start, you could say. They've had solid goaltending from Carter Hart. They are winning, even though they're not necessarily, some of the games they've won, you could say they weren't necessarily the better team. A lot of the ways that they're leading to victory, in my opinion, right now at least, I'm not convinced it's sustainable. So we'll have to see, but it's been a nice story so far. John Tortorella's worked wonders with the roster. I mean, on top of these two guys that we just talked about with Ellis and Couturier not being there, they've been without some other players as well, for a significant period of time, some other key pieces there. So, certainly it's a very much a battered and bruised lineup with a lot of players that, were expected to be, major contributors that are just not present in Philadelphia. So certainly have to wonder, what they can do longer term. But when it comes to what this team is going to be doing over the course of the season, Anthony DeMarco is reporting that a player like Ivan Provorov, even though he's received recent praise from John Tortorella, saying that he was certainly been a bit better this year, and he understands the struggles that he's been through the last few years, that he's not untouchable at all, and they would absolutely trade him if the right deal comes along. We know that they signed Travis Sanheim. They have Ristolainen longer term. It's a little bit early for this, but obviously where Provorov does have a bit of term, if he were traded this year, it could be a player that a team makes an acquisition for a real solid top four defenseman, and it wouldn't necessarily be a rental situation. So it might be a case where they could get some pretty good value in return, depending, of course, on how he does between now and the rest of the year before a trade ever could have a chance to materialize. So again, no guarantee he gets moved, but certainly the report saying that he's absolutely not an untouchable and they would absolutely do it if the right deal comes along certainly makes you wonder where things go. I mean, there's been times in the past couple of years that there's been some reports that Provorov didn't necessarily request a trade, but it's kind of known that he would welcome a fresh start, so to speak. That's been out there before. It's been a while since that's been something I've heard, but it's been something that's been mentioned before. So we'll have to watch this situation closely and see where things go. Obviously, if the team is winning and if they can sustain this, I'm not yet convinced that it's going to be, but if they do, then I would suspect that he would be less likely to be traded, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But certainly a key player to watch throughout the year. According to Pierre LeBrun, the San Jose Sharks are wide open for business, and pretty much everybody outside of likely Thomas Hertl, who just recently signed a long-term contract extension, would be possibly available for the right deal. He feels Hertl might be the only untouchable player on that roster. And of course, untouchable is one thing, tradable is another. A player like Erik Karlsson, who's actually having a nice start to his season. Like, he's got a decent amount of goals and assists. He's done really well with 3-on-3 action. I think there would be teams that would absolutely love to have Erik Karlsson. The way he's shown that he can play again this year, he's certainly a nice comeback story, but the problem is nobody's going to want that contract. He's playing better. He's certainly been a more dynamic D this year, but he's still not an $11.5 million player. So unless the Sharks want to eat half that money and have that on their books for the next, I think it's 4 years or so that's left in the contract, I don't see that materializing. But, basically everybody there is open. They have lots of rental opportunities, but it comes later into the season towards the trade deadline. You're looking at players like possibly goalie James Reimer. Center Nick Bonino should get a decent amount of attention. A player like Matt Nieto could be a good depth piece. Those guys are on expiring deals, good depth pieces heading towards the playoffs. We talked about before, Timo Meier being a player that we need to keep an eye on as well. His qualifying offer on his RFA contract is $10 million this year. So do the Sharks really want to qualify him at that? I would suspect that they would probably do it in order to get his rights retained, but they don't really want to sign him to a contract worth that kind of money. Now, of course, last year Meier had a real solid year. Can he keep that up to the point that he convinces Sharks management that they need to keep him and that, a long-term deal around that $10 million range is justifiable? I'm not so sure, but certainly going to be a very, very interesting player to keep an eye on with that QO. Really going to drive things, one way or the other here. Even players like Kevin Labanc doesn't have a lot of term, but a little bit. Certainly not meeting expectations. There's something to think Logan Couture could be available as well for the right price, of course. He's still somebody who can certainly play and contribute and would be a great piece for a lot of other teams to add near the deadline for sure. So it doesn't mean we're going to see a flurry of San Jose Sharks trades now, but the way they've started the season, I know they've had a few wins lately, but many expect they will be near the bottom of the standings when we get closer to the later in the season when the deadline's approaching, and that many of these Sharks are going to be available for trade. We saw a massive sell-off out of Anaheim last year, and I think this year San Jose could be the team that we see as well. I know, like I said, even guys like Karlsson, Vlasic, they'd move those guys for the right deal. I just don't see a scenario presenting itself where those contracts are really tradable and really, something that other teams are going to want. I mean, they might like the player, like in Karlsson's case to some extent, but nowhere near that kind of money. And I don't see San Jose wanting to retain money on a term contract that long. Now, the other team I want to touch on quickly as well is Vancouver. Of course, we know the Vancouver Canucks finally got a win. They beat Seattle last night. So Bruce Boudreau gets a coaching victory number 600. So certainly congrats to Bruce. So that was well-deserved. Been through a stressful part of the year. The team finally gets a win. I know they kind of watching their back behind-the-scenes locker room videos that a lot of teams post, giving out their Player of the Game type of thing awards. They gave it to Bo Horvat last night for being such a good player, both ends of the ice, being a beast on faceoffs and all that. And Horvat's a player I do honestly wonder what the future holds there. I've seen a lot of Vancouver media talking today, especially after seeing the Ethan Bear trade, really questioning why things changed so much. Like all offseason, all you heard was the comments from Alvin and Rutherford really made it sound like they were going to trade JT Miller. Then all of a sudden they changed their tune and signed him right near, later into the offseason, much later than you expected. And I wonder if that's going to impact their ability to keep Horvat now. There have been some reports that he rejected a very much a lowball offer around the end of training camp. and there are more words that they're not even talking now. So, as we had heard before, between he and his agent, a lot of players don't necessarily like to negotiate in season. He's going to be a UFA, so if they leave things till the end of the year, doesn't mean they can't get him signed if they want to get on the same page and make it work out. But at the same time, if the team, is going to be heading in the direction it's heading, between that, the salary cap situation, and everything else, the contract demands, I honestly do really, really wonder what the future holds for Horvat in Vancouver, and if maybe he could end up being dealt after all. Like, going into this season before the Miller signing, I never would have thought I'd be saying that. I would have thought I'd be saying that Miller was a more likely player to go, and that Horvat would have been signed before Miller, not the other way around, especially based on how the Miller negotiations were going. It was extremely surprising that they A, did it, and B, did it before getting the Horvat deal done. Considering both guys came into the year with, the final year of their contract, I find it very surprising they didn't circle back to Horvat to complete that deal. But Rutherford himself have said that they were concerned if they go into the season without both of these guys on expiring contracts, that they would be in a position that they could end up losing both. And that's something that they really were concerned about. So getting at least one of them signed was a high priority. It just many didn't think Miller was going to be that guy. And then because of the deal they gave Miller, could it impact the ability to keep Horvat? I mean, based on what we're hearing that Horvat's looking for, which is going to be substantial, we're looking at, probably $7+ million here based on what a lot of other comparable players are making. That might be tough for them to do. So it's going to be a very interesting season in Vancouver. Obviously, winning changes a lot. Getting into the playoff spot changes a lot. Be something we can probably kind of push down the road talking about if they're going to be potentially a playoff team. But if they're not, I do expect them to continue wheeling and dealing here. We've seen a lot of smaller trades here over the last few days, given they traded for Ethan Bear. Of course, they traded Michael DiPietro to Boston. They get Jack Studnicka. So things are happening. We know Alvin and obviously Jim Rutherford especially has a history of being aggressive. So be curious to see how much further these trade talks continue and what other changes we see here in the short term as they try their best to work with Coach Bruce Boudreau and find their way out of this losing streak to start the season. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments, and we'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe, stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis in all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.